we actually had almost 50,000 people watch a 2.5-minute video about business taxes and like explaining business taxes. When you think about it, you're like, can we check those numbers again? Did folks really see that?
Yeah.
But it was interesting, and people commented on it, and it was just engaging to see that many folks. And so like, okay, we invested in these animated videos and it makes sense. And maybe they would have never read the 30-page report or like the 1-page summary, but we got the information out there. I have 2 younger brothers, and one who's 10 years younger than me was like, Gene, do you know your stuff's showing up on Reddit? And I was like, really?
Yeah.
And I go through and I see like, oh yeah, people are like using it and citing it, and they're using it in like different debates, which I thought was just so like interesting and like exciting that like folks took it and they're like engaging with it in a real way. So those are some of the things like proudest that we're writing about things and it's getting out into like the atmosphere. I think that's really important, that like regular folks, right? Not the conquered bubble people,
right?
But like regular people are talking about it.
You're listening to Granted Goodness, the show about optimism, progress, and problem solving all across New England, proudly hosted here in the Granite State. My name is Andy DeMeo, and today I'll be talking to Gene Martin, Executive Director of the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute. We talk about what fiscal policy actually means, how to make it accessible and nonpartisan, New Hampshire's unique civic culture, common misconceptions about the budget, and many other things on this episode of Granted Goodness. Special shout out to our friends at New Hampshire Possible for sponsoring this episode. I hope you enjoy it. We're here with Gene Martin, not to be mistaken for Dean Martin. Easy mistake, you've got your fantastic bow tie on. The New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute. It is a pleasure to be here with you today, Gene. Thanks for taking the time.
Of course, Andy, I appreciate the opportunity and looking forward to chatting today.
Yeah. So you do fiscal policy. Fiscal policy, I feel like, is one of those phrases that gets a bad rap. You know, like when people think about economics or fiscal anything, like it, and then we're going to fix this misunderstanding today, but I think it sounds boring to a lot of people, right? Like even the phrase fiscal policy. You are not a boring dude. Again, you've got your bow tie. We've been chatting a little bit since I got here. I've been following your work for a while. Like you guys do cool stuff. You have your fingers in a lot of different issues, and you just produce like really thoughtful, intelligent, commentary and analysis on every issue people can think of affecting the state of New Hampshire. So it's not boring at all, but we're going to get into unveiling that for people today. So like,
absolutely.
What the heck is fiscal policy, Gene? Like, what is it?
Well, let me just take a step back, because in terms of the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute, we're a nonpartisan research organization, right? So nonpartisan, nonprofit organization focused on the state budget, the state economy, a variety of policy decisions, anywhere from education over to health, and everywhere in between. But really we're focused on the economic security of Granite Staters, particularly those with low and moderate incomes. And so I think, just to be sort of simple about it, fiscal policy is how do we make public investments that benefit the large majority, or sort of every citizen or resident in the state. And so that's when we think about fiscal policy. Like if you have a challenge, I like to say this to folks, if you're complaining about something, right, chances are it's some level of government and there's some fiscal policy at play there. So really, like, how are we talking about public budgets and having an impact in everyone's lives? And surprisingly, like, you can sort of, from the day that the moment that you get up until the moment that you go to sleep, chances are there's some level of fiscal policy at play in your life.
I've heard people say a similar thing for, like, you interact with the government all the time, right? Like the roads you drive on and the internet infrastructure and all these things. But to think about it in terms of that was once, possibly a line item on a budget sheet or something, mm-hmm. right? Like that you benefit from, someone thinking thoughtfully about it 10, 20, 15 years ago, right? I used to take the Amtrak train from, Newmarket. Well, not from Newmarket. There used to be a stop there. There isn't mm-hmm. anymore. But Exeter to Boston, right? And I was always so happy for that, because like that project took forever to get done, and that I happened to be in this time and place when it was manifested and usable, right? Because all these people thought, hey, let's get a train line up and running, all that time ago. It's like I benefited from that. That was once a fiscal policy decision to make.
Well, absolutely. And think about the people just for that who might not directly benefit, but there's less traffic on the roads because someone made an investment, and we might not see it break even in that moment, but no one looks at the roads and bridges that we fix and say, like, did we break even on those? That people are like, thank goodness that they're safe and we're able to get across them, right? We don't have the potholes. So all those sort of investments that happen, we often don't connect them, but that's really true. And especially in a state like New Hampshire, because we have a volunteer legislature. And so a lot of the work that we do at the Fiscal Policy Institute is helping to explain what's happening and sort of taking the data and the analysis and helping to have policymakers, but leaders, business leaders, community leaders understand what's happening. Because if you don't have that data roadmap, that foundation, how can you sort of make any sort of investment in anything moving forward?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I feel like I hear people talk all the time. I've had other people on the podcast, New Hampshire Civics, right? They're a great organization. Allison Ryder. I had Dr. Nancy Pearson. She is all about making civics interesting, even sexy, right? Like that's a phrase that she's kind of coined. And so I've interacted with other people who work on a similar problem from a different angle of, we got to get people excited about government, right? At the local, like everyone always wants to focus on, the huge machinations of the federal government, and it dominates the news cycle and all that. But here in New Hampshire, it's a little like we have an opportunity here to be involved and engaged that maybe a lot of other people don't, because we're so small, and for better or for worse, we have so many state representatives, right? So the barrier for entry or to have any kind of effective engagement in politics, local government is accessible here. Absolutely. In a way that it isn't in a lot of other places.
Yeah, and when civics, I think people always talk about, and Allison Ryder and folks, that's such a great, New Hampshire Civics, such a great organization. She's such an excellent leader in the state. Something that she always says, and I take this to heart, is that it's not just about voting and elected. It's like, how are you getting involved in your community? Like, how are you helping out when it's needed? What local board are you serving on? How are you trying to make an impact in a way that's, yes, voting is sort of civically part of that. We don't do that at the sort of New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute, but I think that's an important thing. Like, when we think about that, like, what local club are you part of? And I think that's something in society we've been missing as folks are more busy, and part of it is an economic issue that folks don't have the flexibility, maybe because they're working extra jobs, or they have to, they have childcare issues they have to deal with. So it's like, how do you get involved in your local community? And sort of, to me, that's sort of some of the great things about life in New Hampshire, is that it's so accessible on every level.
Yeah. So how does somebody become the ED of this organization? Tell me a little about your path.
Yeah. So part of it, I think, for me, and the story that I like to tell, if you think about my life, fiscal policy had a huge impact on it. What I mean by that is that, I had a parent who struggled with addiction. And so my parents, when I was a young kid, split up for a time. We lived in a homeless shelter.
Wow.
We benefited from public assistance programs, right? My parents were able to get back together, through Section 8 housing. We're able to get an apartment. We're able to save up enough money through a federal-backed mortgage. We're able to buy a house here. And I went to school thanks to the federal government sort of investing in, kids like me. Obviously, I went to school that's sort of funded. So you think about all of those things that happened. And I was always interested in how to give back. Again, I was so grateful for all the opportunities that I had in my life. And so I wanted to find a way to give back. And I thought public service was a great opportunity. And I did that in a number of ways. But I've always been interested in policy and how do we make life better for everyday folks. Obviously, folks like I was, growing up. And so for me, I kind of was involved. I worked at the State House in a number of different ways over the years, and then worked in the nonprofit sector at one of our state universities, my alma mater, Plymouth State. And really, I saw the opportunity a few years ago to come back, and I was a donor to the Fiscal Policy Institute, knew folks that were on staff, and just thought it would be a great opportunity to grow the organization and be able to have an impact. Like I mentioned, the thing about New Hampshire is that again, our legislators get paid $100 a year, so and they have no staff. I think that's something that folks probably are surprised about or don't really know, because people think politicians have all this sort of staff and they're spending all this money.
Right.
But really, they don't have that. And so a lot of the work that we do, and we have a great team at the Institute, but we really focus on how to bring that to folks and make it accessible so they have that information. And so I think if you are concerned about any sort of public policy issue, or you have any concern anywhere, it's likely tied back to fiscal policy in some way.
People must make this joke all the time, but like, you must be great at parties, right? No, because I mean, it's like, well, that's fiscal policy and that's fiscal policy, right? Like, you could make the argument. Allison said something similar. It's like, it's all civics, right? Like, it's all civics at the end of it. Like, we're here in this building that was, zoned and built by, rules that were safe for the people building it, and the material, like everything you could think of, right, is like a product of, okay, there was a structure for people to cooperate, right, or exchange goods and services and value, or rely on, a public institution in some way. I didn't know that about you. Like, that's an extraordinary story that, you had all these awful things happen to you in your life, and that you could channel that into a career of serving others.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I think about talk about this sort of optimism. I'm actually so grateful that I had that lived experience, because I think it shaped who I am, and I think it's allowed me to say, okay, and again, just to sort of note, that experience could happen to anyone, right?
Sure.
Most folks live paycheck to paycheck, and so if we think about, again, fiscal policy comes into place, most people don't have 3 to 6 months of expenses sort of saved up, right, in a high yield savings account or whatever. And so that really matters. So I think it shapes my worldview of like, how can we be helpers, and how can we make life better for individuals no matter their situation. But yeah, no, it's sort of an interesting, but to the point to the parties, you have to really pick and choose, because people love to talk about facts and sort of data. I feel like I am constantly running into people who are saying something, and it's like, do I decide to have this like 10-minute conversation about, well, actually, like, here's a trend over time, and sort of do a deep dive into why actually young people can't buy a house, and it's not the avocado toast or the coffee, right? Like, it's just,
of course,
the system
we should have
really
had
different.
some with us here today. Yeah. What are some of the biggest, not misunderstandings, but lacking of awareness, like however you want to characterize it in an inoffensive way, which I always endeavor to do. What are people always surprised to learn, I guess, about the nature of your work?
Yeah, I think when we think about budget and tax, really like state budget, which is a very excited thing. I kind of say like it's our Super Bowl when the governor sort of announces, her budget, and sort of we go through the process, right? Those are like big sort of things for us at our shop. But I think about, I think a lot of people in New Hampshire assume, and I've heard friends, like people I went to middle school with, who would be like, well, Gene, like our state's run on like liquor, right? Like, isn't liquor like 50% of our state budget?
And the lottery or something.
And the lottery,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
And when you think about liquor, tobacco, lottery, it's actually like 15% of our tax revenue. And I just want to like pull back a little bit, because actually only about 33% of the collective revenue that we bring in is tax revenue. So 33%. So the rest of that is actually non-tax revenue. So that could be federal transfers, we call them, but basically the federal government gives us money and for programs for different sort of things. And so that's about a third of our state budget. But I think it's the fact that liquor, tobacco, lottery really doesn't make up the lion's share of the budget. It's actually pretty small, all things considered. So I think that's sort of a key misconception. And the other one, that I really we talk about often, is actually how the state is really funded as a result of business tax. We think about tax revenue,
right.
And it's sort of, when people say business taxes, they think like local mom and pop shops, but actually it's large corporations who fund, sort of, not to get wonky, but like the business profits tax, which is like our corporate income tax.
Yeah.
And most payers, right, like about 120 filers pay. Last time I looked, it was about 40% of that. So again, substantial.
That's a lot of money.
And
from
exactly,
not a lot.
exactly, and a lot of them are big multinational filers, right? So they're not folks that are just located here in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
So again, think about like the big companies that you probably buy from that, sell things here. And so that's how the tax is essentially apportioned is the way. We also have a business enterprise tax, which are other business tax, which actually is essentially an income tax, but not on the employee side, on the employer side.
Yeah.
And that was actually because of a lawsuit that we created that. But those are sort of some of the misconceptions of like, actually, here's how we raise our revenue. And the other thing I think folks know it in their local property tax, but really aside from your local property tax, maybe your rooms and your meals and rentals tax, your average Grand Stater isn't paying that much in state or local tax when we think about it, because
Right.
you really just have your property tax, and renters pay that indirectly because
Yeah.
obviously your landlord's going to pass that
Right.
around to folks. So those are some of the misconceptions that I think, I hear when just sort of, I sometimes will be out having lunch and just hear people talking about things. But again, obviously depending on where you are on the income scale, right, that sort of
Yeah.
has an impact for you. But for the most part, when you think about state and local tax, there's a lot of fees, but for the most part, like property tax is usually the big thing that people do. And 70% of our education is raised by local property taxpayers, which is
Right.
different than other parts in the country, other states in the country.
I'm imagining you out to lunch at some restaurant, and the table next to you, they're talking and they say, "Did you know that 80% of the taxable revenue for the state comes from 5 companies?" And you're like, "That's not correct. It's 40% from 120. I know I could correct them, but I'm gonna resist. I want to have my sandwich."
Yeah, there's something. My wife is really good about that. At sort of barbecues or parties of like, just like, "Oh, Gene, why don't you go and say that?" I'm like, it doesn't always work when you're just like, "Let me tell you something. Did you know?"
I want to have fun.
Exactly.
Today.
I want to sort of shut that off. But like, it's just, you have this knowledge, and of course, very few people pay deep attention to the state budget, right? How many people really print it out and read over line by line and
Yeah.
sort of look at that? So those are the things that we try to know and pass along to people, because there's so much that happens. And so
Right.
we want to show like, what's the thing that people should really know? If you have a limited time, what are the, 5 or 10 things you ought to know about this?
And even the nature of even attempting, right? People can always have an opinion or a critique, but saying, we're going to try and just go at this from a nonpartisan lens, right? Like that, I think you could make an argument today is an unusual sentiment for a lot of people. Like there's such an instinct, there's so much incentive to nationalize every issue, right? To look at even the way things are being described as like, oh, well, that's a conservative point of view, that's a liberal point of view. But even the attempt to say, we're going to try and describe the issues in a way that we think is nonpartisan, that we can deliver the most value, the most factual things, for your time, if you're going to take a moment to read all the cool stuff we put out, right? Like that's admirable. And I don't know, like, do a lot of states have organizations similar to the Fiscal Policy Institute, or are you unique in some way? Like, I'd love to hear how you think the environment you operate in with is different or similar to even some of our neighbors in New England.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think there are other entities that do the work that we do. I would say a lot of, again, haven't done like a state by state sort of an analysis on it,
Right.
but my guess is that a lot of folks, and we're sort of like, I'm looking over at the State House,
Yeah, it's literally right there.
over there as we're sort of doing it, but you have other offices in state government that will do this crunching for legislators, because again, and there's lots of
Like the CBO, people always talk about the CBO.
exactly, and
yeah.
we have a great office. It's sort of the LBA, the Legislative Budget Assistant. They do great work, but they're really internal focus, so they're not putting out information that's sort of crunching numbers. And so
Right.
departments will do that, but even then, our departments are so lean, and so like other states, and there have been a few bills over the years that have tried to say we should have this independent state entity, whether it's attached to the legislature or in the executive branch, that does more of this. And so I think if we had that here in New Hampshire, I don't know if we would exist in the same
Right.
way. We might be, but different. But like for our purpose, we want to take this information and say, here's what's really happening. Here's what's really going on. And it's not just the averages that sometimes mask sort of issues that are deeper in different towns, but really go through and say that this really matters, and here's why it should matter. A few years ago, Phil Slatton, we have so many great folks on the team, but in 2022, he wrote like a 55-page report talking about long-term care. Now, that's like not an exciting thing unless you may have like a parent or you're caring for someone, your caregiver, thinking about sort of folks that are older. But that really matters, right? Like, how do you fund that? How do you have the workforce to support those aging adults? And
you guys just did a great episode about this.
Oh, yeah. So we did it on the podcast. But sort of that sort of report highlighted that we had not kept up the funding. And actually, you had nonprofits, because a lot of the work that happens, the state government will fund programs, but through nonprofits, right? So they're not doing a lot of the direct service themselves. They're funding contracts to these sort of nonprofit organizations. And what we heard was that they just weren't able to get the folks, and they were going to shut programs down. So think about the impact that would have had on seniors of like, they can't get the care that they need when they need it. And so we sort of showed that actually, reimbursement rates needed to be increased. And again, advocates used that information, was able to get an increase, which is pretty sizable at the time in that budget, but that had a positive impact on folks. But again, sort of that report highlighting, and again, I think if state agencies might have contracted out to have that report, but it helped that we were local, people knew us, they trusted us, and they were able to act in a bipartisan way to say, you know what, this is right. Like, we need to do something here. So like I said, I think that's sort of our value proposition. And I would say like our secret sauce is that folks trust the work that we do. And it also helps that we don't lobby for legislation. Like we will say, here's what's happening. We might say, here's some solutions or recommendations, but we don't go out to the legislature with an orange badge on and say, you should pass this. Like, we don't talk about supporting or being opposed to these bills, which I think is why folks really value us, because we're not doing that. We're just sort of saying, like, from our lens, from low and moderate income folks, which is, depending on how you look at that, 400 to 500,000 granted staters. Right. This is an impact that could happen, and how are we thinking about them? So I guess like for us, that's where we've kind of been, and we just want to be able to put out good information so people have good decisions and are able to make them, at least be able to agree on everything that's sort of happening.
Hey there, I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. If you're liking it, it would mean a lot if you could take a moment to give Granted Goodness a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. This is one of the best ways to help more people discover the show. But the very best way to support us is to subscribe at granitgoodness.com, where you'll find an abundance of stories about problem solving, progress, and optimism all across New England. And speaking of cool local people, this episode is shared in partnership with our friends at New Hampshire Rocks. You can learn more about them at nhrocks.com. This episode is sponsored by New Hampshire Possible. New Hampshire Possible is building a statewide movement for a better tomorrow. With support from the Endowment for Health, their partners are creating a state where everyone has what they need to thrive. Thank you so much to New Hampshire Possible for supporting Granted Goodness, and now back to the show. Well, it gets at an interesting dynamic, right? Like you must think about this all the time, because on the one hand, and I don't mean to imply these are opposing goals, right? But you could say, okay, we're nonpartisan, right? So we want to try and describe the issues outside of the traditional lens of liberal or conservative. How do you think about that? Like, how do you think about, we want to advocate for a positive direction on any complex problem, whether it's like making cost of living better or helping people not live in poverty, like pick your issue, but doing it from a lens that is outside of political dialogue, I guess. Like, does that make sense?
No, it does. And I think part of it is, we often provide a lot of technical assistance to organizations and some of our partners. We have almost, 90 to 100 folks that we work with, at any point throughout the year. And part of it is like, okay, we want to do this. What makes sense? And how from a policy perspective, how can we accomplish this goal? And just the point on the poverty numbers, I like to always highlight for folks that, yes, on average, we have have the lowest poverty rate in the nation. The official poverty measure was something that was created in the 60s. Now we're really going to wonk out something in the 60s, and it's like this basket of goods.
It
doesn't sort of accommodate, but I'll sort of note, I'm making the assumption that you and I both have an average net worth of maybe zero, depending on the mortgage. It might be like in the negative numbers. But if Warren Buffett walked into this room, the three of us would have an average net worth of like $50 billion.
Right.
So like the average is not to sort of say like is not the best measure, because we know that there's poverty happening. And I would say even a step outside of that is folks that are struggling to pay like regular expenses.
Right.
It's sort of gone away a little bit, but there was this census instrument, the survey that was the Household Pulse survey that asked, in the last 7 days, have you had a hard or a very difficult time sort of affording household expenses? And New Hampshire had about like a third of folks said that that was the case.
Yeah.
And it actually, during the pandemic, went down because of pandemic relief aid that sort of was invested in people. And so you think about that measure, that's like a different way to sort of cut at it. So I think those are the things that we think about, is like, how can we provide context and contextualize all the different things that are happening, right? Because most folks don't have time to dig deep into the Census Bureau data.
They'll see one thing and be like, oh, that's great. But really, there's detail. The nature of the problem has changed,
And also making, one of the things that we started to do more of in the last year or so is do more maps. So folks can so you can click on your town and you can see, okay, what is poverty? What's your poverty rate in your town?
Yeah.
What's sort of the SNAP percentage in your town? Because I think people say, oh, this large statewide number, but you're like, oh, wow, there's 19% of folks in my town that are sort of on this, program. I think it humanizes in a way like, oh, those are some of my neighbors. Like I think people don't realize that 1 in 8 people in our state are on Medicaid, which, we get focused on the terms, but that's just health insurance, right? Like they need assistance being able to have health insurance. And I think we'd all agree, like, that's probably a good thing for us. But 1 in 8 of our neighbors, when you think about it, that's a lot of folks. If you're just sort of like in your community, and obviously, again, depends on where you are, but sort of a statewide 1 in 8. So those are the different things that we try to think about, and what is it that we think people need to know, or what are questions that are being asked that like we could help add context to that.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense, and it's an admirable approach. You have a really cool logo, you guys, the Fiscal Policy Institute. It's a little graph. I wonder if you could turn to the camera a little bit.
See it.
Yeah, and show it off. It's up and to the right, and then it goes down a little bit. And I think that whether intentional or not, this is a good analog for the nature of progress, right, on all kinds of issues. So I don't know if that's intentional or not, but share a little bit with me, and you've given some good examples, like what are some of the things that your organization has done that you're proudest of, or impacts that you've had, or times and examples where you feel like because of the work that the Fiscal Policy Institute does, like we made a difference on this person understanding an issue or making a decision somewhere.
It's also, it took me, a minute to put it together, but it's actually the state of New Hampshire. It's supposed to be.
Oh,
yeah. So it makes sense. But I'm with you. It wasn't until maybe like 7 months into the job that I was like, what? It's interesting how it goes down. And then someone was like, well, it's the state of New Hampshire. Because when we rebranded, I wasn't here, but I was like, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense, sort of in the logo. But I do think things, right, like naturally goes sort of, sort of up and down. But I would say, for things that we're most sort of proud of, I think one, like we have a real incredible team. So sort of Nicole Heller, Jess Williams and Phil Slutton sort of on our research team. And then we have, a great sort of set of folks on the comms team that help us, one, get the word out, but also make sure that we're properly editing things and there's no sort of typos. But I would say part of it that I'm sort of most proud of is that we have grown as an organization, but we're trying to fill a gap in more policy areas. And so I think for people, one thing that we're really proud of is when our work shows up in places that we don't expect. So Nicole Heller on our team, who does a lot of our early care and education work, sort of childcare work, she did a piece early on in her time here, and it started to show someone on staff. It showed up in their like Concord Moms group, like
No
Facebook
kidding.
group, like a graph. And then like a few of us got it who have kiddos,
Yeah.
saw that report being sent around because it had a chart about sort of the scholarship program. And that's sort of for childcare scholarship, sort of a sub-state subsidy.
Yeah.
And it had a graph. And then we're like, wow, we put it out there. Yeah, the press talked about it. People went it. But like folks took that and used it to communicate something out in a way that was really exciting or different. But to see the work out there for the folks, we've hired a few new people recently, and one of the things that we've heard was like, oh, I write something, and the next day it's in the media and it's being talked about, and then I see it online, and then we're sort of on WMUR. So to be able to write something and then see people, we're like adding to the dialogue, and we're helping to shape the debate by bringing facts to it. And so I think that's really something that I'm really proud of. Like I said, we have an incredible organization, and that's kudos to the team who really help do that. But it's really, we've done a lot over the last few years to like take our reports, do more social and digital, knowing that, right, folks might not listen to, a 50-minute podcast, but they might listen to a 2-minute,
They're
online.
listen to this one.
Exactly, they will 100%. But they'll also listen to, like a 2-minute video. And we actually had almost 50,000 people watch a 2.5-minute video about business taxes and like explaining business taxes. When you think about it, you're like, I kind of was like, can we check those numbers again? Did folks really see that?
Yeah.
But it was interesting, and people commented on it, and it was just engaging to see that many folks. And so like, okay, we invested in these animated videos, and it makes sense. And maybe they would have never read the 30-page report or like the 1-page summary, but we got the information out there.
Right.
And, it's showing up. I have 2 younger brothers, and one who's 10 years younger than me was like, Gene, do you know your stuff's showing up on Reddit? I was like, really?
Yeah.
And I go through and I see like, oh yeah, people are like using it and citing it, and they're using it in like different debates, which I thought was just so like interesting and like exciting that like folks took it and they're like engaging with it in a real way. So those are some of the things like proudest that we're writing about things and it's getting out into like the atmosphere. I think that's really important, that like regular folks, right? Not the Concord bubble people,
right?
But like regular people are talking about it. Really matters. I had a friend who was the chair of her childcare board, another childcare example, and her childcare director was talking about how, sort of tuition costs and whatever, and sent around one of our report. And my friend sent me a text message being like, Gene, our director's using your own report. And I was like, how is it that my friend's organization is sort of doing this? And I was like, that's like funny because it's a small state, right? She lives like an hour away from me, but it's just funny that like the work gets sort of like recycled in so many ways.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's a really good example of, kind of what I was like talking about a minute ago. Like that wouldn't happen, I think, if trust wasn't there, right? Like you guys and I read a lot of stuff, right? Like to find things for my newsletter and just out of my own interest. But like I see conservative outlets, right? Ones that are like, it's on the tin, like we are a right-leaning, kind of outlet to look at news and stuff. And the antithesis, you see liberal-oriented outlets. Like I've seen them all rely on your work and use your work and cite it in articles and things. And so the fact that happens, right, both in like examples of people with a stated bias and also, regular people just looking at it and on a committee or on a Reddit forum or something, right? Like you should be very proud of that. I get the sense that you are, and it doesn't happen by accident. And even the way that you guys write about issues, right? Like, as you said, that someone outside of, the bubble of people who are paid to think and work on these issues, that it can be understandable for a working mother, right? Who's never set foot in the State House, right? Like that's awesome, right?
Absolutely. We had a conference on the state budget, and folks, some of the feedback, we brought the conference back in 2013 after like a COVID sort of like hiatus, and some of the feedback, we did some panels and people were like, for the budget, we just want you to talk at us. Yeah. And
you're like, what?
And the team, we kind of had this thought and we're like, okay, this is like, again, we love data and information. So we surveyed people. People said, this is what you want. And so we said, okay, we're going to do this. And for our December 24 conference, we sort of did state budget, right? Because we're going to state budget year at that point in time. And we had like 456 people sign up to attend. Obviously, folks sort of so things happen in sort of the day, so they might not come or stay for the whole different thing. But we had legislators from both parties there, and the feedback afterwards walking up to me was, and again, like we have a lot of legislators, so like I don't know every person,
Yeah,
but
and they're always changing, yeah.
and so like having like looked it up or getting emails after the fact, we had both Democrats and Republicans say, "Wow, I learned something. I didn't know this was the case." Right? We got some like notes and folks saying that, and I thought, wow, like we did a pretty good thing that we put on a conference for many hours,
Right.
that folks were just like captivated, that we were just going through, like 90, slideshow decks, right? We're just like whipping through it and sort of saying like, here's all the information. So yeah, that stuff is really exciting, that people sort of appreciate it. And then, again, we don't know what they do with that knowledge, but like
Right.
we're sharing it. So at least we all have a shared understanding.
Yeah. Well, I again, this is my optimism goggles. Like, I love that example and I love that story because, the thing that I want to believe and that I always am looking for evidence of, and that I see, like I'll make the argument for it, is that people are curious, right? That, yes, not everyone, might be a staffer at the Fiscal Policy Institute, but regular people, like we're here in the United States, we're here in America, civic engagement is supposed to be baked in, to the fabric of the whole concept, right? Like people are supposed to engage and be curious. And I feel like I see that where like you'll talk to truck drivers or bus drivers or regular people and like, they may not have a perfectly accurate picture of like issue X or Y, at least compared to an expert, but they have an opinion about it, right? And the fact that you see and get so many regular people being like, yeah, I want to like talk at me for 5 hours about the budget. Like that's really cool, and I would bet that is probably more unique to New Hampshire than, a lot of other places. I'd like to believe that. And I think you can make an argument it is.
Absolutely. And again, I would just say like, I actually love hearing from folks that aren't the Concord experts, because I find that when we say something in our very like detail focused way, because we want to make sure that we're factually accurate in every way, they'll say, well, Gene, I think what I actually heard was, and I was like, wow, that's a way simpler way to say it.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that, because sometimes we get so focused on the details, but regular folks, and I think, I give people credit, like people know what's going on and sort of like what should be done, but they don't always have the capacity or the knowledge to like, how, like, I think people know housing and childcare and healthcare are issues,
right?
But like, what do we do about them, and why is it so challenging, and like, what can be done? And that's where I feel like people just are looking for that optimism and really guidance to say like, what can we do to actually make it better?
Yeah. All right. Well, that gets to my closing series of questions here. We want to talk a little bit about New Hampshire Possible, right? I mean, people have an idea if they're listening to it, but like, why did you guys want to sign on to what New Hampshire Possible is? And maybe even, what gives you the most hope, or what do you think is, a unique and promising opportunity? Like what about operating here in this time and place gives you optimism about our capacity to make progress on different problems? And does that relate to why you're doing New Hampshire Policy? I figure it is, because like it's supposed to be about optimism, but like, tell me about all that.
Well, I think what I'm really excited about is that it's a group of people that are coming together to say, and again, it's like, yes, it is possible, right? So in the name, but that we have challenges in the state. Like I said, we all love, most folks love the state. I'm proud to have grown up here, but to acknowledge that we do have challenges, and we need to be thinking about what we can do in the future to sort of address those, hopefully before they're crises, before they're happening. And so that's why I love, like, again, getting people together and saying like, we could solve these problems. Like, what are the things that we all agree on, and how do we sort of build a plan and build a structure to say like, we can connect people? You obviously had Jennifer Frizzell on talking about healthcare costs, and like, we could chart a path where we could sort of do more consumer protection. We could do more transparency, have an consumer advocate. Like there are things that the state of New Hampshire could do that can make a difference in healthcare costs. Yeah. And some of that, of course, is federal, but like, we could make a difference. So that's why, for me, I always sort of remind people like, we can use public policy to make a difference in people's lives. Mm-hmm. A few years ago, through a federal policy, we saw it in the country, we saw it here in New Hampshire, child poverty cut in half.
Yeah.
we did that. Like we did that through actually a very little amount of money when we think about the grand scheme and like making the assumption that we should end child poverty, you know, as functionally as we can. And we did that. And of course the investment ran out, wasn't renewed. And then we saw those numbers go back. And so like we affected here in New Hampshire, we cut that in half, and we could have kept going, right? We could have brought that to a functional zero. So those are things I think about with New Hampshire possible. And, you know, how can we actually collectively solve problems? Because again, I go back to this, I think people can say, you know, we could talk about sort of like the top concerns of people and, you know, what are those opportunities for those different areas. But I think people know the challenges. They just don't always know, like, how do we fix it? How do we move forward? And that's something that we've started to think about, because we talk a lot about the challenges, and we've been shifting more to like, okay, how can we focus on the opportunities? And that's kind of how I think about it, is that we can make a better place. You know, I have 2 young daughters, so I'm always thinking about, fast forward 20 years, what kind of state am I making sure that my kids live in and that they have? And not even if you don't have children, like I think we all kind of want
you can still care.
You can still care, because chances are, right, like you might be in a hospital one day, and, and like even though if you didn't have kids, like someone's kid who's going to care for you as that nurse or doctor, or paved your road,
is the police officer in your town,
or like is working at the local library, you know, because you want to read that.
You should
book.
care.
You should care. So those are the sort of things. So that's what I'm really excited about in New Hampshire Possible. Is like, folks, and I'm sure you feel this way about because of the work that you're doing, is that you can get smart people together and say, how can we solve problems? And I think that's where, like, to me, we want to be in a society. I'm very optimistic by nature, and I just think that I love and I feed off of that with other folks, of like, how can we actually get things done for people?
Yeah, love it. All right, closing question: live free or die. Some people hate it, some people love it. What does that phrase mean to you?
I think it's a great question. I actually have a belt. I won't show the audience, but I have a Live Free or Die belt on right now that I bought over at the State House many years ago. And I always say, like, live free or die, but like, what are we doing about helping people, like, actually that live part? Like, and what are we doing for policies? You know, housing is really expensive. What are the things that we're doing to help people on that front? Childcare is a big cost. What are we sort of doing? And so for me, I would sort of flip it and think about, like, what are we doing for individuals? You know, because there's a longer quote, and I won't try to remember it because I'll probably
death is not the worst
of evils. Yeah. And so that I think is sort of the imagine, like, life is a really special thing, and I'm sure I'll catch some flack for this because I always talk about this, but I read this book not too long ago. I love books, but read this book about basically, if you're lucky, you get like 4,000 weeks in life if you think about it.
Right.
And so I'm at the point where I'm like, okay, I kind of have like 2,000 weeks left, but like, what are we doing in the time that we have to make life better? Not for just ourselves, but for everyone else. And so when I think about like that live free or die, I think about like, how are we having, like, it's sort of tried to say like, oh, live free and thrive, but like, what are we doing to help folks? And that's sort of what animates me and the work that we do at the Fiscal Policy Institute. And I'm guessing a lot of the guests that you have on the program.
Yeah. I love it. I couldn't have said it better myself. Gene, this was a real pleasure. Thank you for being here today and for reminding us what is possible in New Hampshire. They didn't make me say that. I'm happy to do it. They're like, you can be low key about it, just be very casual, but I love everything about it. Love the work you guys are doing. Keep it up. And thanks so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Hey there, thanks for spending some time with us, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation. You can learn more about today's guest and how to get involved with or support their work in the show notes. If you'd like to suggest a guest for the show or have any good news story tips, shoot me a message at hello@granditgoodness.com. Music for this episode was provided by the band Sneaky Miles, who hail from Newmarket, New Hampshire. Until next time, I'm the creator and host of Granite Goodness, Andy DeMeo. Thanks for listening.